genetic data, as an example, is being shared quite widely across the globe. But there are certain nations that have outlawed the sharing of their genetic data from their citizens outside of their country's borders.
I think that we've been too distracted by the little shiny without focusing on how we develop ourselves and take ourselves forward. And you can't help but ponder if that was a considered approach to do exactly that and shift that power balance of knowledge.
The issue that we don't really have a solution on is around the integrity piece. And I think this lends more to the advent of generative AI services.
The ex-CISO from Facebook, Alex Stamos, and others, what they were seeing was that there's not a great deal of threat from nation states.
We're seeing the kind of explosion of AI and machine learning. Those threats that are coming through, they will also be taking advantage of those technology types and already starting to do so. No longer are they getting poorly crafted phishing emails.
Welcome to Threatcast, a podcast by Threatscape where we discuss everything cyber. My name's Paul O'Sullivan. I'm the UK Sales Director, and my host today is Toon, a former CISO at Pins & Masons. I'll let Christian introduce himself for those who don't know him. Christian?
Hey there, Paul. Thanks for having me. I've been in the security industry now for about 17 and a half, 18 years officially. Before then, I didn't even know it was a kind of career pathway. So unofficially, I've kind of, I guess, collectively been tinkering with tech and security stuff for probably well in excess of 20 years. As you've called out, I'm here at Pins & Masons, their former CISO, and I've held sort of a variety of roles in my time, from non-exec positions, advising senior stakeholders on cyber and technology risk, through to outsourced or interim security roles through PwC, and end-user security roles with some large information and data management companies. Fast forward to kind of where I am today. My current role as head of cyber professional services, I now spend a lot of my time working with senior executives and general counsel, advising them on their cybersecurity risk and how to go about dealing with the threats that they're facing or their challenges their organization has when it comes down to data, technology, and cyber risks.
You said you'd been in cyber for 17 years, but before that, you didn't know it was a thing. So how did you make that transition? How did you stumble in? Was it by design? Was it stumbling in?
Fell at a great height, I think, like probably most. Going back to the kind of early 90s, I guess, the only real educational pathway for anything related to kind of, or close to what I do today, was computer science. And that just wasn't what I was interested in. I liked exploring the internet, working with technology, both from a hardware point of view and software, and understanding how things worked and what that involved and how things connected. But that didn't exist in a curriculum or a pathway for me to take advantage of, sadly. So I continued the passion and sort of hobbyist focus around there. I always remember kind of having some close run-ins with the college IT teams, and one of my first favorite programs called WinNuke, which allowed me to take other students offline whilst we were having our ICT lessons, which was much to my amusement, but maybe not so much theirs. So followed a completely different pathway through education to a point where I got to university and then realized that that wasn't for me, and was presented with an opportunity to go full-time into a operations management role. So left university and kind of left the academic world behind and just went straight into work. Fast forward a few more years, developing my craft of just getting stuff done in an operations context, was working with a large information and data management provider responsible for digitizing central government, UK government records as part of a mass litigation claim that they were working on at the time so where were we now? HMRC lost those infamous 2 disks. And although I believe some of the urban myths, they never existed in the first place, but the reported position was they lost these disks with 25 million child tax records on them. And for me, that was the sort of watershed moment of data security as was. And in my role and the business we worked for, we were suddenly kind of encouraged, if not expected, to put forward a suitably trained, qualified and experienced person to be responsible for their data security as a core supplier to central government. And I thought, that sounds pretty cool. That brings together some of this hobbyist fascination of data security and the technology, coupled with, I guess, a more responsible role of safeguarding data and looking after things for people. And fast forward from that particular trigger point, I spent about 6 months with the now defunct National School of Government, learning all about RMADs and accreditation document sets and the infamous IA standards that the UK government used at the time. And that was really my baptism of fire into the security world, I guess, if you will. And the roles developed, and my learning and passion and hunger for the discipline continued. And I then built out quite a reputable GRC history and kind of career, and had then the opportunities to move and operate on a global footing in some highly regulated industries, spending time with the Coventry Building Society and MS Amlin as their CISO through my time at PwC, which was great. And again, sort of fast forward to the opportunity here at Pinsent Masons, which is a greenfield opportunity to build out a security program that they hadn't had before, and were really committed to delivering security with purpose, which is kind of doing it because it's the right thing to do, not because a standard's asking for it or a contract says we need to do it, which is all well and good and does kind of propel a lot of people and a lot of organizations to do that. But really being empowered to do security because it's the right thing to do here at Pinsent's was just a phenomenal opportunity to not pass on. So we set about building the team across the sort of 4 disciplines that we defined, and really kind of brought a new order of information and data security, kind of now cyber, I guess, is the sort of core buzzword for what we do, into a global professional services business. So it's been a great journey, not the traditional one and that many face, and certainly now the opportunities for learning pathways, apprenticeships, sponsored positions through academic roles, and indeed better curriculum from starting at kind of GCSE and A levels all the way through to degree and diploma certificates and opportunities for people to kind of come back into the industry. So yeah, I've seen a lot in that time, and only this morning noted that Cyber Essentials is coming up to its 10-year anniversary, just starting to really kind of put a marker on my tenure in the industry, because I remember when that first came around. So that gives you a bit of a flavour, really, Paul, of kind of my routine.
It's interesting that you say you kind of did the tech part, but it didn't really tickle your fancy. But when a lot of people have talked to me, it's that curiosity, that hacking in the good way, as it were, that I think is quite key. You've seen yourself, there's been lots of debate recently on LinkedIn, a whole, should CISOs be technical and all the back and to around that. Personally, I think it's an amalgam of all the skills. You don't have to be out and out technical, but I think it helps. You mentioned the background in GRC, but the little bit you mentioned around operations, I think that's the bit as well. I know when I was doing tech, it wasn't the coding, but it was the systems analysis. It was figuring out how do we digitize that process, and whether you code or somebody else does, use IT to leverage that. And I think that's probably one of the skills that I believe, the point of this podcast, is coming to the forefront now. It's that conduit between the tech and the people, as it were the explanation. And interesting you say about the compliance and doing it because it's the right thing. I think we're still in a world where it's tick the box compliance rather than, again, buying into the fact that we could benefit from making this the core of what we do rather than because we have to do.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's where litigation comes in, and you can really tell between those organisations that are ticking the box and those that are genuinely committed to doing it because it's the right thing. Why would you not want to safeguard the future of your business? It's got to be top 3 operational risk that most organizations should have on their agenda. So why would you not want to protect the business and protect your employees and indeed your clients as part of that? But quite often it's not understood at the senior levels enough, and their kind of compliance approach is then just often the approach organizations take, but rarely good enough, rarely is. And that's the big point, that, I mean, we see the breaches that are occurring daily across the globe. Organizations still have those certificates, still have the kind of badges and kind of the compliance statements, but they need to go that little bit further if they're going to truly either avoid being breached or minimize the impact of that breach. And a lot of that goes into doing more than what's required to prepare your organization for when that breach occurs. Because I think it's quite well understood or expected now that organizations will have a breach. But if you can't demonstrate you've done and taken appropriate steps, reasonable technical or organizational measures to roll out across your business, then that puts you in the crosshairs of the regulators firstly, but then also thinking about your customers or your data subjects you're holding that information for, your shareholders and stakeholders that actually want you to keep that intellectual property safe. You're not really discharging your full duties when it comes to safeguarding your business. And it does make a difference, right? So if we're assuming everyone's going to get breached, because that's kind of the adage that I think came out of the FBI, that kind of it's not a case of if, but when. So we assume breach, which is a great kind of position to start from. So working backwards, how are you going to handle that? How are you going to deal with that? And I think that's a lot more now how organizations are judged. It's not necessarily on that preventative step, but actually it's how they're dealing with it. And everyone that seems to have a advanced, persistent threat and advanced targeted attack at their organization that was actually a kind of well-crafted phishing email to somebody who clicked the link and gave out access, it sort of just starts to shine through the quality of their response capabilities.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I was thinking of an analogy when you chatted, and we always have the analogy of information security tooling and processes is seen as kind of insurance almost. I think the way I perhaps expand that is, compliance is like third party. That's the minimum you have to have with car insurance. But the reality is, do you really only want that? Do you want to take that risk? And, if you're driving 40,000 miles a year on busy motorways and hectic roads, maybe to your point, you're being reckless in your duty if you've just done the bare minimum because, hey, guess what? Chances are you're going to have an accident.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think it's almost one of the downfalls of the certification sort of part of cyber. So the ISOs, the cyber essentials, the NISTs, the CAFs, whatever the frameworks and standards you're kind of operating to as a business, that it often sort of builds that sort of false sense of security. And you kind of think, well, you get these certificates and actually that should evidence your commitment to security. But anyone working in the supply chain side of what we do will know that doesn't matter if you've got the ISO certs or the PCI certificates, is you're still going to get kind of audited as a result of that. Which then sort of begs the question, well, what's the purpose really? If you don't believe or validate, take confidence from our security position because we've got an ISO or we've got a DSS certificate or whatever that may be, then it really does kind of cloud the water. And I think undervalues then those certificates because they're just seen as a sales tool, right? You can pass through to the next round of that procurement process because you have the right certificates, but we're still going to kick the tires on the security position anyway, regardless of whether you've got them or not. So I think that's a debate in itself. So maybe not to take over the podcast on the benefit of certifications, right? But It's certainly one we have to challenge with.
Right. And just coming back, zeroing in on the you're joining at Toon. So as you know, I've known the organisation for many years, predecessors. Was there an appetite to drive that as a benefit? Obviously, you took on the role. Did you still see the challenge of getting that buy-in? Talk me through a little bit of that where you're able to, if you wouldn't mind. I think that's what key for people.
Sure. So InfoSec is always a challenge, right? Whichever organisation you are in. And part of the remit of security leadership, whether that be the head of or the CISO, big part of that role is around breaking down the silos, the barriers, and convincing the organization what is an appropriate response. And for us, and actually, before I go into how we did things here, for me, when it comes to positioning information security, I find the fear, uncertainty, and doubt position gets you short-term traction. So if you want to scare people into the fact that we should be doing stuff, you get short-term traction and it moves quite swiftly, but it peters off. And then you've only got so many chances in that organization or in that business to cry wolf. And if you start with that kind of fear position, you've got a real finite time to get stuff done. And it doesn't build long-term support and cultural support with your endeavours. So we've always looked to flip it and actually present the benefits of why this is a good thing. And the time I joined the industry within legal had a very bad reputation for security. I think described by one of the spokespeople in one of the, I don't know if they were in security community or government, but sort of described us as the legal sector being the weak underbelly of British PLC. We had a sort of very bad reputation to deal with that. And for us, the benefits that would come from sort of doing good security would certainly look to challenge that stereotype. But also, if we could make this work quicker and be innovative in our approach, we could really differentiate ourselves in the market, that we're not just great, amazing kind of legal services and professional services support, but actually we're taking this seriously and against a narrative of what was quite critical, possibly still is in some parts of our industry. We could really evidence that we were leading the way or doing things differently that allowed us to give confidence to our clients, or that we were doing things for the greater good. And that really kind of supported and crystallized a lot of the buy-in that we got. The other element that we had, and very nuanced to the legal profession, maybe also the accountancy world, is obviously the way the business is structured. So we operate in a partnership model. So out of those kind of 4,000 people that we have across the globe, we've probably got about 450 partners that are owners in equity of part of that business. So we're not just part of the payroll here. Every one of those 400 or so own a little bit of the business. So again, we're tapping into why it's a good thing. Sure, we want to safeguard or protect the future of Pinsents, and how do we do that will then come. But we're sort of really tapping into those individuals to say, well, look, we want to protect your investment. And that was great because you're working alongside the business owners. They're not far removed like a more typical VC or shareholder in that organization. You're directly working there alongside the business owners. So you were able to really build up the justifications for why that's important. And if I turn around to you and said, look, surely we'd want to protect your salary going into your bank account each month. Let me do what we can do to protect that and safeguard that. And that, I think, really resonates at a personal level.
Yes. You mentioned the selling on foot, and I think certainly the supply side, the industry's been guilty of that. Every time there's a thing, up pop the vendors and the suppliers, I have a thing and stop that thing. And I think we, certainly in the last 20 years, have been guilty of perhaps driving that almost indifference, that lack of trust, because we've cried wolf so many times and it's not a fixed problem. Whereas, as you've described, I think taking a different approach has to be better in the long term, building that trust and that buy-in. That said, I think I've seen a little of that client side as well. I think sometimes, dare I say, people on your side of the fence, or former side of the fence, haven't helped because they also succumb to that FUD. And talk me through the nuance of, if you can give an example of where you started to change that, because I'm sure there'll be people in the organisation with a perhaps more cynical view. We have this thing, then we have this thing, and still not fixed. Now we're coming back again. How did you win some of those over? Mark talked about cheerleaders, for example, in the podcast that I did with him. I'm really interested how the approach you took with that.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting concept. I've heard Mark talk about that before, and it really resonates. I think it's kind of two parts, I guess, really. Firstly, it's myself and the security team that we had around us, is to sort of recognize that we can't fix everything. And I think, firstly, from an internal point of view with the security team, that was absolutely paramount for me to align the team's expectations. Worked in the industry for a while now, and one of my biggest observations is kind of burnout and mental resilience for security professionals, because they often take the approach where they're in security, they've got to secure all the things and got to do all the things the good security books say we should be doing as a business. But for a whole host of reasons, organizations don't necessarily do that. Those individuals get frustrated that they're not able to do the right things for security, and then in turn perpetuate a negative view or frustration with the organization or employer, and in turn just find themselves on a bit of a downward spiral, complaining that the business isn't doing this, it's not doing that, and it should be. And it doesn't help, firstly, that individual's state of mind and well-being, but then also the approach taken within organizations. So for me, it was important to set that tone with my internal team, to be clear that we're not going to be able to fix everything. There isn't a magic pill for 100% security. And it was important to set that tone for two reasons. One, to give them that assurance and air cover that despite our best efforts, things will go wrong. But I'm here to give them the kind of support and cover to do the best we can do, because that's all we can ever ask of them. Also, to set that expectation that risk management is going to be a core tenet of our security program. And for the stuff we can't fix or we don't get to fixing fully, we will have a clear, transparent process to document and evidence those decisions, those risks, and where needed, escalations to the right people that need to make those calls on what we do and how we do it. So on setting that tone within the internal team and the capabilities to go out and do security, that was our sort of first point. And then with the second piece, and perhaps not too dissimilar to Mark's cheerleading concept, was the idea that our communications within the business will happen at all levels. And in those communications, we would ensure that we made ourselves approachable, connected, and sort of aligned to the Pinson's values, but available for conversations on security, whether it was at the highest level in the organization or indeed the lowest level of the organization. And we started to win those hearts and minds because we were engaging, and we weren't necessarily engaging with security as the first point of conversation, because it's a business issue. And the sooner kind of we can speak the language of our stakeholders and our paymasters, the better or quicker they will start to have conversations with us and understand. So I'm not necessarily talking to them about vulnerability management and patching cadence, but actually talking about the impacts of not doing that and how that impacts the organization from a business point of view. And that's a great example, I guess, is where we see friction and how we can sort of win that over. Because we were talking about before we started recording the various patch updates and restarts that we've all had to go through this morning and how important that is. Conversely, we've probably lost about 20 minutes each while the systems have had to go and do that. And that's 20 minutes less productivity the organization has had to kind of have to shoulder. So security does impact the organization, and quite often it's perceived to be a negative impact because people aren't having those conversations. So then building those relationships with those key stakeholders and talking to them on a regular basis and communicating, I guess, with them on a regular basis, not necessarily just talking because they're busy, we're busy. It might be memos, updates, presentations, recordings, etc., to really kind of build that advocacy for why we're doing what we're doing. And as a spin-off from kind of that cheerleader concept, quite often organizations, as we did, build out a security champion model, which I think probably most are familiar with. This is stakeholders and individuals around the business that have a passion or an interest in security or want to help be our eyes and ears across the organization. So augmenting our security team with those cheerleader champion types really then helps scale that security messaging and help reinforce the security culture that we've been so precious at building.
Yeah, so clearly the key word here is communication. That's what I'm hearing.
Definitely. And it's surprising. I mean, I often reference it as some of the soft skills needed, yet they're some of the hardest ones to master. So it's not without its own challenges, because different stakeholders, different organizations, different personas and characters through there will require different approaches. There isn't a one size fits all. And so it's important around not only being able to communicate, but being able to tailor that message accordingly.
Thought you may need some people from supplier side to help you do the selling piece, right?
I think, yes, obviously, present company included, it does help, because certainly if your organization is quite lean on the resource perspective, you can't then be expected to do everything. And I know, as you will, as I'm sure many people listening and watching to this, it can be a little frustrating that you need an external party to come in and say the thing that you've been saying for the last X amount of months or years. But augmenting that messaging with external partners does definitely help. And that's really helped in my career, because sometimes I've just become that frustrated professional where I can't seem to get that message across. So I then say, well, who can help me with that? Is it a technical message? Is it a business message? Is it a cultural message? And looking at my network and resource pool as to kind of who can help me with that. And it doesn't necessarily need to cost anything either. So again, if I'm working with a small security function within a business, the idea is that kind of like people buy from people, and you build up a network of trusted advocates and supporters outside of your organization. That's one thing I do like about our industry is that there's always somebody willing to help you and support you. And if you've got that network, then yeah, why would you not trade off?
My tongue was a little in cheek when I said that, but equally, I think there is a little merit in that. It gives us a nice little segue into the state of the industry then. So Be interesting your thoughts on that, where we are currently as an industry, both I guess supply side, client side, but we're all in it together, right? So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I guess I feel like this security industry at the moment, and if you look at sort of, I guess, the split between vendors and end user or kind of in-house security, I feel like we've all gone swimming in this massive Olympic swimming pool that we call the community. And whoever was letting people in wasn't counting how many people should be allowed in the pool for health and safety reasons. I just think it is massively crowded. And I'd said I've been kind of through the mill a few times to kind of recognize where everyone is. But starting out in this industry, I can see it being very difficult to navigate because you don't really know where to turn. The supplier market side is very kind of convoluted with lots of providers, kind of a lot of the same sorts of things, same services, same capabilities, etc. Maybe in a different color. I use the Baskin-Robbins analogy here that there's 150 flavors of ice cream, but it's still ice cream at the end of the day. So it makes it very difficult to navigate if you're not 100% sure as to what you're after or where you're going, or indeed you don't have those relationships. Some recent data from the Department of Science, Innovation and Tech around the state of cyber in the UK market alone. There's over 2,000 organisations registered in the UK to deliver on cybersecurity, whether that's as a managed service, as consulting, as products, but that's a lot of organisations. The industry itself, I think, is over, £11.9 billion in size currently, or based on last financial year. So that makes it obviously very attractive to VCs, private equity, as well as innovators and disruptors wanting to come into the market. So all of a sudden, you've got a big pool to play in, but actually, from a practitioner point of view, does feel pretty crowded. And it's how you make those decisions of who you partner with and who you bring in or who you work with, because we can't do everything ourselves in-house. That's a very stark reality. And you do need third-party support. So it's how you go about kind of working out what technology types or what people you want to surround yourselves with, and how that comes about from a delivery point of view, because the ones you may want to work with, probably too expensive. The ones you don't want to work with, probably more kind of in line with budget expectations, but equally you've got to find a happy medium. So it's certainly grown significantly over my time, and I think will continue to do so without a doubt. But it becomes harder and harder to navigate. And you see on the buyer side, the buyer's not exhibiting the right sorts of behaviors for a collaborative partnership and relationship because they're just focused on price, or they're quite rude, dare I say, to the sort of supplier market that are trying to help them. But then conversely, the supplier market, as we've touched on before, don't often cover themselves in glory, exhibiting kind of poor sales tactics or poor relationship practices of trying to engage and kind of contact and speak with those buyers. So it's a conundrum I don't have the answer for, but it's one that you start to see as people spend longer in the industry and they move through their positions, gaining seniority. They tend to keep a few relationships with specific individuals. And I think it's more a people buy from people than a people buy the tech. And that's certainly evident in my approach to the market, where we've had good experiences working with people and they've really helped us deliver on X, Y, and Z through the time. So just because they're now at a different organization doesn't necessarily mean that we can't use or wouldn't go there. We've known each other for a while now, and I'm more likely to go to you for a problem I've got than picking up the Yellow Pages. We don't have those anymore, but going to Google and finding somebody to come and kind of approach me by a cold, or find somebody from a conference or a market. That might be relative to a new industry issue or perhaps a nuanced challenge I've got, but I'm more likely, as others are, to pick up the phone or drop an email to people that they know and they've worked with than kind of respond to a cold approach.
I mean, I'm quite cynical often, both about my fellow sales people, droids as I like to call them, but also I think the marketplace, you're right, I personally think it was being overinvested in. There have absolutely been the Baskin-Robbins analogy that you give of 95 flavours of endpoint or something. And I think with the cooling of the appetite for VC investment, it's kind of exposed the solutions that perhaps weren't all that and it's narrowing that choice. And I frequently, I use the Momentum Cyber kind of graphic showing all the different vendors in all the different quadrants as our reason for being, because to your point, to try and navigate that, it would just be impossible. And because it's been very competitive, you've been bombarded with this nonsense over time. So I do have some sympathy for buyers, but equally to your point, I think also they cannot help themselves. If you go to these events or you do whatever, the gift to get is your contact details to maybe follow up. And so if you kind of opening that up and then not engaging with people and just saying, look, no, not for us, then it increases the velocity of the attempts to try and engage. And that times X means that you've got a cacophony of noise.
Yeah.
And to your point, I don't have an answer for that conundrum either. I think the natural answer will be the longevity of people in the industry and the ones who are now running off to do AI or whatever they're doing, because that's the next big thing. It'll cool. And I think it will naturally settle in and of itself as the money chases the next big thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think my biggest advocacy point here is for people to kind of respect the game. And that's people on the vendor side and sales, business development, but also on the buyer's side, that a lot of these big events won't happen or can't happen without the investment from those vendors, right? I'm sort of very aware of the sort of sponsorship and exhibitor models for this sort of stuff. So kind of just be open and honest when you're then at a stand or engaging in conversations with those organizations. Be respectful that you're there because they've funded the event. So kind of be respectful for that, but equally be upfront. Don't lead them down the garden path because you're enjoying a few bottles of beer or a gin and tonic from their stand, or you want one of the drinks bottles or a notepad. I find that like having those relationships and being upfront kind of saves their time as well, because developing business is quite an intensive process and can be very time consuming. And imagine kind of investing 3 to 6 months worth of effort for somebody to turn around and go, I don't have a security budget. Oh, you need to go speak to so-and-so. Can be hugely demoralizing and frustrating from a sales point of view. And you've just kind of wined and dined or kind of tried to build a relationship with this one individual that was sort of, oh yeah, we're thinking of doing this and that and the other. And oh yeah, I'll take another free drink or this and that and the other. And it's just disrespectful. And it kind of frustrates the hell out of me when I see individuals at conferences kind of not taking drinks or anything or the hospitality, but just sort of really clear of taking advantage. And alcohol's a big thing at the moment in a lot of the conference settings. As just the purest example, somebody gets offered to buy a drink. Great, I'm not drinking at the moment, so it's an easy one for me. It's something non-alcoholic. But you go, okay, bottle of beer, glass of wine. You get others that go, okay, right, I'll have a triple most expensive thing on the top shelf, and yeah, I'll have 4 of those. And then they just sit there and maybe walk away with one of them. And you just kind of think, well, that's just massively disrespecting the kind of the process. I know that kind of happens from a hospitality point of view, and it's great. But the big piece there is respecting the game, because it's just not fair.
I think just saying that, I'm perfectly happy with no. No works for me. Great, move on. Or not now, even better, fine. Yeah, interesting one. So I guess moving on to from the industry in and of itself to, I guess, the threat landscape looking ahead. What are your thoughts around that? What do you think is coming over the hill? We've obviously got a general election looming. Also, at the time of recording this, is now a couple of days ago. We've obviously got a lot of turmoil across the world, Middle East, certainly Ukraine still. Do you see that as an influence? Do you see something just in and of itself in I guess, the cyber world? What are your thoughts there? What are you thinking?
So I think for me, and I'm not going to sit here with a crystal ball going, AI, nation state attacks and everything else, because I think a lot of that's either over-reported or kind of, I think it's a given. Yeah. I think it's quite hard to look at what the threats are coming down the pipe, really, because there is so much change going on in the world at the moment from a technology standpoint or indeed a political one. But if I kind of think back to our baseline of the CIA Triad for when we look at information security, I think we will see firstly more of the same and accelerated more of the same. So business email compromises, ransomware, focuses around availability and challenges with confidentiality. That's not going away. It's going to be with us for a long time yet. I think worryingly, the issue that we don't really have a solution on or kind of how to grasp as security professionals is around the integrity piece. And I think this lends more to its the advent of generative AI services that are starting to explode data out from various data sets that have been put in without minimal validation. And for me, it's a bit of a ticking time bomb, to be honest. So security should be considered and should be interested in that integrity piece. And I don't think we've really given it too much credence over the last few years. Challenges that people are having today with AI because they don't have sufficient IA, information architecture and data management, really kind of squared away within their organizations. So I think that, for me, is going to be one of those ticking time bombs that we will see. Maybe not the next 12 months, not the 18, but certainly in the next 2 to 3 years, we will start to see issues with that data quality perspective. As with all kind of technologies, we're seeing the kind of explosion of AI and machine learning and neural networks at the moment. Industry and the kind of good side of us are looking at how we can exploit that for the better. We're looking at increase in productivities, efficiency gains in certain aspects of the modern world. And that applies, I think, also to the security arena, that we are kind of being quicker or being able to quickly respond to the threats that are being posed. And I guess conversely, those threats that are coming through, they will also be taking advantage of those technology types and already starting to do so for the same gain, that no longer are they getting poorly crafted phishing emails or potentially developing new malware strains or vulnerability exploitation approaches using that same technology. And I think that's a real piece to put focus on. So it is, yes, more of the same, and phishing still going to be an issue, insider risk still going to be an issue, ransomware, etc. But I think the pace of those attacks now are going to start to ramp up, and it's that pace of attack that we need to match with a pace of defense.
Yeah, absolutely. We chatted about AI, myself, Rue, and Colin, my colleagues, on our kickoff podcast. And I remember ChatGPT coming along, and the first thing I said when I saw that was better crafted phishing emails. You can do that at scale. It brings scale, in my opinion. And so if you can apply that, whether it's social engineering or something else along those lines, Mike Koss talked about deepfakes, must be a year or so ago. He's been talking about that quite a lot. And you can see that being brought to bear, where you can apply the model to somebody's voice recordings to then try and use it in some form of attack. And it was echoed by Risky Business, where they were chatting through it, and they were saying that the ex-CISO from Facebook, I've forgotten his name, is Alex Stamos, and others. And what they were seeing and what they were sensing was that there's not a great deal of threat from nation states, and some of that is because of the chip availability for China, whereas Western world has the fab capability and therefore can bring that scale. But it's predominantly social engineering, but that could change fairly quickly. And to your point, people crystal ball gazing, it's predictions often go wrong. You see them at the beginning of the year, don't you? See all these vendors or so-called experts saying it's going to be this across the course of the year, even got themselves. And the reality is it's often more of the same.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And when you aggregate all of those kind of positions in, you tend to sort of boil it down to a lot more of the same. As I said, it's not like we sort of would hope to see kind of new ways of attack. It's going to be more of the same for a lot of us. I think where you will see some kind of new and different techniques and tactics is through the kind of quantum technology piece, and I guess the development of those technologies at the nation state level, a battle over resources to enable that development and operation. And then you start thinking, well, okay, maybe it becomes more of a global issue and less around an individual organization. And we were involved in a conversation with an all-party political group here in the UK only this week on this. And there were some great points raised around technology sovereignty and data sovereignty, to the point of being that kind of the technology we're even using and kind of where it's come from, where it's residing, who's behind it, who's developed it, and indeed the data we have and where is it and where is it going. It was quite interesting to hear that genetic data, as an example, is being shared quite widely across the globe. But there are certain nations that have outlawed the sharing of their genetic data from their citizens outside of their country's borders. Again, realizing a potential risk. If your genetic data suddenly falls into the hands of some nefarious individuals, it's not like you can reset it with another 8-character DNA sequence with a special character and a capitalized letter. It's not a password, right? So that's the kind of, I think, the worrying piece that really sits kind of beyond the horizon, is that geopolitical battle of nation states and their citizens around technology and data. And I mean, again, we can spend a morning talking about this because I think it's a really interesting area. If you look at kind of who's either developing the businesses and or buying the businesses, that kind of tech and great kind of chip manufacturers get kind of developed in one country and then get bought out by shareholders from another following their listings and everything else, or they get developed and they kind of explode onto the global market. And then you sort of question, well, kind of who's accessing that data and who's owning it. And I kind of love and hate and worry in equal measure about the analogy around mobile applications. Mobile applications are developed from one nation state to another, and the algorithms used in those applications are maybe biased towards that host nation. And this really kind of gets into the sort of, I want to say conspiracy theory because I haven't done the research to validate this, but it does make you think that if those algorithms from those applications are focused on nurturing STEM talent in your nation, in your kind of home country, but the app is using a different algorithm in another country that maybe doesn't encourage STEM and maybe encourages dancing or silly photos or lip syncing, etc. You can see where I'm going with this, is over time, the popularity of that particular app is suddenly then encouraging and growing engineering, science, technology, mathematics in one nation state to advance their cause, whilst in another, arguably dumbing down the nation because everyone wants to lip sync and do a funky dance. All of a sudden, you start to see a massive shift in capabilities at a country level. I mean, that's quite scary when you think about it like that. And you kind of then come back to reality with little old me trying to defend my organization against the kind of security threats. I think the society we live in today has a lot bigger issues it needs to consider.
Completely agree, and I know exactly where you're going with that. I was nodding away when you're saying, because I share the same view. I think that we've been too distracted by the little shiny without focusing on how we develop ourselves and take ourselves forward. And you can't help but ponder if that was a considered approach to do exactly that and shift that power balance of knowledge. I mean, we're in a country that is struggling with science teachers and physics teachers and especially maths teachers because it's not the cool thing to do.
Yeah, everyone wants to be an influencer these days.
Yeah, I used to have the same with the kids, like, it's nuts. But hey, how do we change it? Like I say, I guess we've got enough on with our own little endeavours within our own organisations, what's expected of us to try and champion. No, don't look at that, look at this. You know where it goes. Okay, well, lining the move then. Going forward, who would you like to suggest or recommend that we might want to talk to next? Do you think anybody you can think of that share some useful insights?
Put me on the spot now. I should have really researched this. I didn't know it was going to be an exam situation. Who can we think about? Who can we talk about? So are you looking for security professionals? Are you looking for just industry individuals? Do you want tech people? Do you want non-tech people? What's
IT or cyber leaders, I guess. People who have faced the challenge that you've faced, the things we've talked through, people who could help, whoever might be watching this in the audience to overcome the challenge and getting the board bought into good cyber practices.
So I'll tell you what I'm going to do, and you probably may think I'm going to duck this question, but I'm not. I can certainly give you a list of 3. But what I would encourage is quite often the security industry kind of hears from the same people. And that's not to detract the high quality of those individuals, and I love hearing from them. But I also think not enough people put themselves forward to speak and talk about their views and opinions. So I would like to actually encourage one of your viewers, one of your listeners who hasn't thought about doing this before, to get in touch with you and share their views and opinions. And I would want you to try and champion the kind of the unspoken, or perhaps somebody's view that hasn't been on the stages or hasn't been on podcasts and videos and everything else, and encourage more people for a diversity of thought in that process.
Excellently swerved. You truly have made the transition into sales, haven't you?
But I tell you what, once we've finished here, I'll get my thinking hat on and I will send it through the names as well, just in case somebody doesn't come forward. But I would implore watchers, listeners, anyone who kind of sees this, is to, if you've not thought about doing it before, please please do. We want to hear from you. It's not just the case of hearing from the same people all the time. We really would welcome that. And if you haven't done it before and want to do it, and you've got a great message or a great kind of opinion on something, but still feel a bit kind of unsure, drop me a note. I'd love to coach you for the next podcast with Paul. So don't let that be a barrier. And it's something you can all do. It's great. You just sit here and give opinions on stuff, which everyone has. And virtual recordings like this, you don't know if anyone falls asleep. Nobody can throw anything at you. So they're my two measures of a good, successful talk. So what's not to lose? But yeah, I would encourage somebody to step forward from your listenership or readership. But failing that, if they don't, I will drop you 3 lines offline, Paul, as well.
Fantastic. Right. I think that's a great shout, Chris. I think that, I know you're an advocate of this, that diversity of thinking and opinion. Same for me with the team I work with, that, you know, I often say, here's an idea. If there's a better one, I want to hear it. And I think we need more of that. That's the only way we move things forward and improve.
100%.
Great stuff. Well, Christian, thank you so much. It's been really useful, really insightful. I hope people have enjoyed it. Check out the full episode on the YouTube channel or your preferred podcast platform. But for now, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.